And we're live. Welcome to the Writer's Corner live show. On this show, we connect authors from around the globe to each other and to their readers. You will meet seasoned as well as new and aspiring authors on the show. Our featured author for this week is none other than the award-winning author Sergio Troncoso. His most recent book is entitled A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant's Son. So don't go away. We will be right back. If you're just joining, hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Brigetti Limbanda from Cape Town in South Africa. I'm a live video camera confidence coach, and I host and produce live video shows to help brands, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and of course, authors share their stories. I'm also a responsible social media advocate, and in this show, we bring you the backstories of authors and aspiring authors. And my co-host is Mary Elizabeth Jackson. She is an award-winning author of the Poolicious children's book series. She's also working on another book, which is going to be released at the end of January.
Yes,
and I know, yay.
Mm-hmm.
And she's also working on a movie screenplay. And so Mary is a wife and a mom to 3 beautiful humans who inspire her. She's also a special needs and disabilities advocate and lives in Nashville in the USA. And I am down under in Cape Town in South Africa. So let us know where you're watching from. Hey, Mary. Hello. Our first show of 2020.
I'm so excited. We should have had not guns going off, but, horns and a band and, confetti and everything. So yeah, I'm super excited that we're back and we have a great year for coming. And with, here now, we're going to start off with a great author. I'm so excited to start our year off, and 2020 is going to be awesome.
I know. So let's say hello to everyone on LinkedIn. Marco is joining us on LinkedIn. Marco, hello. Nice to see you.
Hi, Marco.
And, and hello to our audience on Facebook, on Twitch, on Periscope, on YouTube. Welcome to the first broadcast of the Writer's Corner live show in 2020. And nice to have you joining us live. Thank you very, very much for joining us. And we've got an amazing author. Sergio Troncoso is the author of A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son, a collection of linked short stories on immigration, which Junot Díaz called a masterwork. I'm dying to hear a bit more about this book.
Absolutely.
He also wrote From This Wicked Patch of Dust, which Kirkus Reviews named one of the best books of 2012 in a starred review. The novel also won the Southwest Book Award. Other books by Troncoso include Crossing Borders, personal essays, and it won the Bronze Award for essays from Foreword Reviews. He's also the author of The Nature of Truth, hailed by the Chicago Tribune as impressively lucid. Publishers Weekly called his first book, The Last Tortilla and Other Stories, richly satisfying. He is currently the Vice President of the Texas Institute of Letters. He served as a judge for the Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction and New Letters Prize for Essays. His work has recently appeared in New Letters, the Yale Review, Michigan Quarterly Review, and the Texas Monthly. And his website where you can find him is called sergiotroncoso.com. Couldn't get easier than that, isn't it?
Right, absolutely. And that's a great thing to have your website, your name, so people can come find you so much easier, because a lot of authors have multiple books out. And so you can't, it's really hard to have a website and stuff for every single book. So just having everything under one thing, one house, one roof is the smartest thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, shall we invite our guest to the show?
Yes, let's bring him on.
Dying to meet him. So let's invite him on. Hello.
Hi.
Sergio, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
We're so happy to have you here with us this morning. And well, it's morning for us, right? Morning, kind of midday, and it's evening for Brigetti. So it's kind of cool. We're all connected in different parts of the world.
Yeah, I'm in New York, and I know you are near Nashville and Cape Town. That's exciting.
I know, very exciting. So we're kind of an international show right now.
Yes, it is. That's what I love about live streaming, just being able to connect from different parts of the world. And it's, it feels like we're sitting in the same room just having a chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how did you get to become a writer? What is your backstory? How did you get started? Because so many of us have got stories and we think, well, we're going to write, but not everyone gets to that point. How did you get started?
Well, I got started rather late in life, but I would say it all began with my grandmother, on my maternal grandmother. I loved hearing her stories as a kid in high school, and she grew up in a little ranch in Chihuahua, Mexico, and she had a really colorful life. Her father and uncles fought with Francisco Villa, Pancho Villa, during the Revolution. And so I would bike from Isleta, the rural suburb where I grew up, to her downtown El Paso, to hear these stories of her surviving the Revolution as a teenager. She had shot and killed 2 men who attempted to rape her. She was this, in Spanish you would say caraja, which is this tough lady, this woman who would not take anything from anybody, and my parents were a little afraid of her. But of course, as a kid, we were like this, just so together. I loved hearing her stories, and she would be smoking her cigarette in her tenement and drinking her coffee, and it would go to 1 a.m. under the desert stars, and people would come from other places to listen to these stories about the revolution and about, sometimes very violent stuff. But as a kid, of course, that's what I loved. I often would tell my sons now that it was sort of like Call of Duty, but Mexican style. So this sort of oral storytelling was the first thing that really captured me. And in fact, the very first story I wrote as a Yale graduate student was about her. It was called The Abuelita, and it was about this this Yale grad student calling his Mexican grandmother in El Paso and talking to her about German philosophy. And of course, it's sort of this clash of generations of the grandson moving beyond the border and the grandmother really bringing him back to the values that made him who he was. And so people say, what are you doing? Is this Latino literature? Is this philosophy and literature? Is this, what is this? Is this sort of a mixture of Camus with Junot Díaz, with Garcia Marquez? And so it was creating, I think, in my mind, something new, a new kind of literature. But I think the oral storytelling from my grandmother was seminal. It was really what got me started. And for me, the motivation was I wanted to get people like her on the page, in the library, in books, because she deserved to be heard. Her voice deserved to be heard. And she had so many things to teach me and other people about how to survive a difficult life, how to have self-worth, even though you faced tragedy and difficulty. And by the way, she was the boss of her household. Let me tell you, if my grandfather did not give her the money that he worked for every week, she would take a broomstick and hit him on the head with it. I am telling you.
She needs to be in a movie.
This was feminism 101.
She needs to be in a movie. She needs to be in a movie.
Yeah. I think
like as you're talking, I can actually visually see this whole scenario. And I'm like, why is this woman not in a movie? You got to do it. You got to do it.
Well, yeah, but it was like feminism 101. So I
love it. She needs to be teaching in schools.
Yeah. Well, she was just a character, and my parents were afraid of her and said, "Why are you spending so much time with her?" And I said, well, because she has great stories. And of course, she didn't treat me that way. I was her grandson,
Right.
And I was perhaps closest to her. And people say, well, you have a little bit of her carácter, of her character. You're kind of tough. And, you know, at my Twitter, on my Twitter handle, it says, si me picas, te pico, which means if you push me, expect to push back.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that from my grandmother, you know, that you get respect not by being a wallflower, but by fighting for what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, just I'll tell you this little last piece. But when I grew up very poor along the border, but when I went to Harvard, I wanted to quit. And I called her that first week and I was crying. I said, you know, I don't belong here. Everybody thinks I have an accent. I should be back in El Paso. And she said, and I would call her on Sundays. Back then it was MCI, you know, because it was cheaper to call on Sunday. And she said, Sergio, don't come back with your tail between your legs. Show them who you are. And that kind of grit, that toughness, was what she imparted to me. She didn't know what Harvard was. She didn't know what the Ivy League was, but she understood how to fight. She understood how to struggle for what you want. And so that lesson is something she kept teaching me, you know, in person, through her stories, through everything I learned from her. So if you want to know why I became a writer, it really starts with her.
That's nice. A very great way to honor your grandmother, and
absolutely
to honor the woman that she was, because not every one of us gets to experience that strength in our life and the way our world is today. We need more of that in our world. We need more of that, teaching our kids and especially our girls that we're raising, how to stand up for and just not take anything. So, you know, it's very much needed a teaching.
Yeah. And of course, you know, growing up in Mexican El Paso, and my parents were Mexican, she was very unusual. You know, she fought against the Mexican machismo that in fact that I was talking to Brigitte before, that against my father. The biggest conflicts I had were with my father, in part because of this machismo that he still had. And I was learning from my grandmother, you know, this is wrong. This is not how you treat women. And, you know, women not only deserve respect, but for me, they were my models. They were the people I looked up to. They were the people who were the best storytellers. You know, my mother was the reader in the family, and she was the one that I connected with the most. But she was, in fact, very much wary of her own mother, because of her experience and how tough she was.
You know, I feel like I want to jump out of my skin right now. I have got to introduce you to a great grandmother in the UK. Her name is Valerie Woodgager, and she would absolutely love you, and I think you'll love her too. She started this movement called Learn with Grandma, and it's exactly what you were talking about, was joining the generations, and bridging that, you know, through bridging the gap through digital media, and the idea is to for the younger generation to teach digital skills to the older generation, and the older generation would pass down their values. So it would be a two-way learning. And I want to say hello to Sarah from Ireland, Sarah McCoy from Ireland.
Yeah, hi Sarah.
Hi Sarah.
So yeah, when you were talking about your grandmother, I kept thinking Valerie's going to love the story. I really need to share this broadcast with her because she will love this.
Yes, she'll be wanting to hook up with you, Sergio.
Yeah, well, I would love to talk, because for me, my ancestors and my grandmother in particular had the best stories, and they were real. That was even more important. It wasn't something she was making up. This was her life. This is how she survived. This is how she crossed over into the United States from Mexico. And so it was, I just felt so lucky to know her, and her character. I would bring, later when I was at Harvard, I would bring people to meet her, and she would she would size them up right there on the spot. She would say, this guy is just a little liar telling you a bunch of BS. She did not care anything about social niceties. You had to be straight with her. You had to be honest with her. And if you tried to pretend or put on airs, she would cut you to the quick right then and there, and she didn't give a crap. And that's how she was. And so she taught me that sort of righteousness to believe in yourself and know who you are and follow sort of an ethical code. And so for me, every weekend I would bike from Isleta on the outskirts about 15 miles as a 8th grader, 9th grader. And I would spend weekends with my grandmother hearing her stories, and then go to the library and read more stories in downtown El Paso. So that was really the genesis of my writing.
That's awesome. And think about that today. You wouldn't let your 8 or 9-year-old kid bike anywhere for even a couple of miles, just because our world is so different. So that period of time back then, we could do things like that. And it was much safer for children to do that. And a lot of times kids were gone all day and didn't see their parents till dinner time, and parents didn't know where anybody was because nobody had cell phones or pagers or anything. So, it's really very rich what you had growing up, and something that was free and, it's really priceless.
But my mother, when I started on my bike, would do the sign of the cross and give me like 5 dimes to call along the way, and until I got to my grandmother's house. And so it was sort of an adventure, but I loved doing it on Saturdays and spending the weekend with her.
So this seems to be a movie. I could just already see it. I could just visually see this as a movie. You just need to do it. We have one life to live, and if we don't do it now, it'll never get done, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I write a lot about her, and people. You're not the first one, by the way, to say that.
I'm sure.
that my grandmother should really be, and people who met her know that this was how she was, and a lot of it was how she grew up. That social chaos of the Mexican Revolution. And the difficulty and surviving all of that, surviving bad men, surviving violence, surviving and coming over and living in Texas finally. So, and even this latest book has sort of a version of my grandmother in the last story, which is called Eternal Return. And so it's in that story, which is the last story that appeared in the Yale Review, this 50-year-old is coming back and he's visiting his dead grandmother. So it has this sort of aspect of magical realism. But the point of the story is, and something that certainly happens to me, is I have conversations with her all the time. I know her so well. I think about what would my grandmother do, and her name was Doña Lola, her Dolores, but her diminutive was Lola, Doña Lola, Mrs. Lola. Miss Lola. And
Sarah was just asking what your grandmother's name was. So
Dolores Rivero, Lola Rivero. And so, she continues to be a very important figure in my literary life, because I think it's about honoring just exactly what Mary Elizabeth said, who she was, what she stood for, what she fought for, and to give her a voice, in literature. So I still get a little choked up, by the way.
I bet you do. I was just sitting here thinking about that. I was just thinking about her. She's with you. She's around you. You can probably hear her. I know every once in a while, when the wind blows and there's a certain sound or smell, it reminds me of my grandmother from my childhood. So, and I think those old stories in our past and the history of our families is just, it really grounds us in who we are, and it grounds our children in who we are. I mean, I know my grandmother went through the Depression, so she, they went through a time they were very poor, and the people who owned the store in the town, she had a baby, the owner's wife, she had no breast milk. So my grandmother was the nursemaid for her own children and the woman who owned the store, and that's how they got their food. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah. No,
Absolutely.
and it just shows also the different times of people trying to connect and doing whatever it takes to survive and to thrive.
Right, absolutely. And things like what your grandmother went through, there's no fluff. There's no frosting on the cake. There's no, oh, bless you, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's just that it's real. And she had to grow up very young, and she had to be an adult at a very young age and make those decisions. So life is a little bit more serious for someone like her.
Right.
In the time period.
And let me tell you, the one of the best memories I have is she would turn up the stereo, put on her Mexican polkas, and start twirling my grandfather around the living room. Like, there was a lot of joy despite all of the suffering she encountered. I mean, she was, she was glad to be there. She was glad to have survived. And so there was a lot of music and dancing. But, you got on her bad side and it would turn. So
yeah, you don't want to meet her in a back alley somewhere.
Right.
Oh my goodness. So let's get let's switch to your book. What was the inspiration for A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son? Have you got a copy of the book with you?
Yes, I do. Right here. Here it is. Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son. So a lot of what I did, I'm going to put it down now, I guess.
Okay.
These are 13 linked stories, and they're all about immigration. Different immigrants coming.
And it's a hot topic in America.
Yeah, it is. And in fact, the book is doing phenomenally well. It's selling actually better than any of my previous 5 books. And so I'm happy about that.
Congratulations.
Yeah, well, you're always, literary work, you never know what's going to happen. But
right.
these 13 stories are all about immigrants coming to the United States and going beyond the border. Because I've written a lot about Americans who have just crossed over and living on the border to Mexico. But these are immigrants going deeper into America, going into the Midwest, going into New York City, to Connecticut, and how sometimes they succeed and sometimes how they fail, and other times their identities, how they're trying to live in between two worlds, between languages, let's say Spanish and English, between what your ancestors taught you versus the new values you're learning as an American, as you're assimilating. And so it's this push and pull of the self, so to speak, that I'm always very interested in. So these 13 stories, what happens, one of my graduate degrees at Yale is in philosophy. So I'm heavily into people like Nietzsche and Heidegger and Wittgenstein. And this is all about the fragmentation of the self, how we are at once our past self, as well as the present self, as well as the self from El Paso in a rural area, as well as the self who is living in New York City, for example, or the self who grew up speaking Spanish at home, but now I use primarily English, and then I learned German as well to read these philosophers. So my inspiration for writing these 13 stories is to link them together. So as you read a character, for example, in the first story, that character will reappear in the next story from a different angle. And so what I'm trying to get the reader to experience is this perspectivism of the self, and of even to encounter your own reader biases, where you might see as a reader a character in a favorable light in a first story, and then the next story you will see that same character from a different point of view, or from a different character's point of view, let's say his spouse or her spouse, and you'll have a very different way of looking at that same character. And so it's about immigration, and it's about immigrants in the United States trying to become American, struggling, sometimes being accepted, sometimes being attacked. But it's also about this play on characterization and time. So the characters appearing and reappearing, within these stories. And so the very first story, for example, Rosary and the Border, I'll just sort of mention that, is this 50-year-old from Texas who's coming back to the border after having left and having become educated in the United States at the best schools. And so it's somewhat autobiographical, coming back to bury his father. And so all of this event prompts a lot of questions about who he is, how he started, how he became an American, what kind of an American he is, this hybrid between cultures and languages. And it sets off the story in a very realistic way. So by the end of the 13 stories in this A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son, you get the last story, which is much more magical realist in a way, in which a similar character is returning and talking to his dead grandmother, and he's having a real conversation with her, and all sorts of strange things are happening. He's going back and forth through time. So again, this is playing with the self and characterization, and even reader bias in how you take a particular character, either in a favorable way or an unfavorable way. So I'm always mixing these worlds in a way, the world of philosophy and the world of let's say Mexican American literature and the world of literary fiction. That's kind of what I like to do.
That's wonderful, and it gives it a lot of richness and depth and all that stuff. I'm going to tell my sister-in-law got her doctorate at Harvard, so I'm going to definitely tell her. I found a book that she needs to read and a new author because she loves to read. So
yeah, and for me, going to Harvard was like going to Mars, because I mean, I grew up, as I was chatting before we started. I tell my Yale kids I grew up with an outhouse in the backyard and no electricity. And we had kerosene lamps and stoves. And I think what the poverty does is it really centers you, and it either you survive it or you don't. Mm-hmm. And so for me, going to Harvard and then to Yale, for me was a huge leap forward. And in a way also challenged me to keep who I was, who I had been on the border, my grandmother's son. How am I going to keep that part of me still a vibrant part of me, even though I am now, living in New York City and teaching in the Ivy League. So that sort of challenge of living between different worlds has always been with me.
And it makes you who you are, which is very unique. Yes.
Absolutely. I want to just give a shout out to Joseph Carabas, who's watching us on LinkedIn as well. And Joseph says, thank you very much for holding up your book. Do you want to hold up a second? We're out of time. Can you hold up for a second again?
Here it is.
So that is the book. And where can people find a copy of your book, Sergio?
Well, it's available, of course, on Amazon. It's also available in Kindle as well. And it's available if you're in the United States. It's available through any independent bookstore, whether it's Kramer Books in Washington, D.C. or Book People in Austin. But the easiest way to get it is probably, through Amazon or through the indie bookstore website that, you just type in your zip code and it'll tell you what the nearest independent bookstore is around you. So
wonderful. Awesome. Well, I hope that you gain a lot of new fans and readers from today. And we will be, we're on 5 different social medias, right? And it'll go out through podcasting, and word of mouth always helps too.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I love to get out there. I am actually traveling a lot. I had been traveling a lot when the book came out in October, and doing a stint in Texas. I was doing, I think, 8-9 days. I drove 661 miles to events in Austin, events in San Antonio, back in Austin, San Marcos, even close to Houston, right outside of Houston. So in Texas, I guess I'm pretty well known.
It's a big state.
Well, now you know. Now you know in Cape Town, South Africa as well.
And Nashville. So.
Yeah, I would love to go. I'd love to travel.
Well,
awesome.
you're welcome anytime. Now you know how to get hold of me. So, if ever your travels bring you this way, do let us know. Would love to meet up with you.
Yeah, and by the way, my editor that's mentioned in the back of the book, The Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son, spends most of her time, Jessica Powers, in South Africa, and has written a lot about South Africa. So she keeps inviting me to go.
Well, there you go. Now you have somebody you can visit.
Absolutely. And Joseph
Sergio,
Carabas said the book is already on his order list. So you've got a
awesome.
fan on LinkedIn.
And Joseph's a great author. You have to look him up.
Yes,
He's a really good man.
I will.
Yeah.
Yes, he is.
Right.
Sergio, thank you so much. We're out of time. I want to say a huge big thank you to our audience who's joined us live. Sarah says Africa, and she says have a great day. Sarah, thanks for joining us.
Sarah.
Lovely having you participate in the show. And thank you very much to Joseph on LinkedIn and also to Marco. It was great having you join us. Sergio, don't go away. We'll put you in the green room and we'll have it. We'll get back to you in a minute. So thank you very much for being a wonderful guest. We loved hearing your story today.
Can I just give a shout out to both of you and thank you for inviting me to your show? I think you're wonderful to be with, and I love having this sort of coffee clatch through the airwaves.
Thank you so much. We love it. We've had a great time, and it is. We thank you so much for blessing us today by being here.
We'll see you in the green room in a minute. That was an awesome first show for 2020. I don't think it could have been better. Sergio's story was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I do hope that you'll consider turning his story into a movie because his grandma's an awesome woman.
I would love to meet his grandma. So yes, what an exciting morning this has been, an evening for you, and we're so grateful that Sergio was able to be here with us today, and we're big fans now.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for joining us. It was lovely having you here on our first show for 2020, and we'll see you back again next week, same time, same place. And thank you for joining us. Do good stuff.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.